All right, kia ora, kia ora koutou. No mai haere mai. This is the second NDF online session. Ko teina hurza toku ingoa. Ko kai whakahaere mātua of the National Digital Forum. My name is Taina Hurza. I am the Executive Director of NDF, the National Digital Forum. Thank you for joining us. We are starting on time to get through everything. A little bit of housekeeping to start with, so feel free to keep your cameras off. It's all good. We know it's lunchtime, so we don't mind seeing blank screens at this point. Better that than noodles down the front. We also will be taking any questions. So there will be a time at the end of each segment for questions, but if you want to just pop them in the chat of the Zoom, then we will collect them as we go. So that way you don't have to wait on your questions. You can pop them in and we will ask them at the end of each segment. The session is being recorded, so any of your colleagues or friends that can't make it today, the recording will be sent to you as well. And at a later date, it will be available on the NDF Hub and also on YouTube. I think that's everything. We have Holly lurking under the NDF logo up there. She is our coordinator and she will be managing the chat and any other questions. Holly, have I missed anything in my housekeeping?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Oh, the other thing we would ask is please keep yourself muted just in case there's any background noises. And we'll get into it. So I'm very pleased to welcome you to the session today on cybersecurity and what the risks facing our Aotearoa cultural organisations are. I'm joined today by my co-host David Hinton from REANNZ. David's the engagement manager there, and many of you would have met him or be familiar with him by now, as he was at NDF and will be a regular appearance on these online sessions going forward. We are also joined today by the James Fitzsimons. He's the head of managed services at the Bastion Security Group. So he has worked across both public and private sectors, both in vendor and in-house roles, and he has developed black box automated trading systems for hedge funds. He's established the CERT-NZ. He's also the co-founder of Cassini, which is now part of the Bastion Group. Sitting next to him, we have Dean Pemberton, the head of engineering at Bastion Security and co-founder of Cassini. He has been basically designing, building, and maintaining the entire internet. So Dean has significantly contributed to the infrastructure we rely on daily. He excels in PowerPoint mode, so we're looking forward to seeing some of that later on. And he's also a bit of an expert when it comes to cyber threat intelligence services, and especially how they relate to the New Zealand government. We are also joined by, Aaron Murrihy from REANNZ. Aaron is the technical lead for networks at REANNZ. His passion is for building simple, reliable, scalable infrastructure and advocating for the same within our research and education community. He's responsible for network architecture and availability, automation, and infrastructure security. Aaron has been working in telecommunication services into underserved rural communities. And we are very pleased to have all three of them join us today, as they know an awful lot about what we are about to talk about. So I'm going to hand over now to David to kick things off.
Thank you, Tana. As Tana said earlier, my name is David. I'm from REANNZ. We've been working in partnership with the NDF to try and see how we can better support your community that everyone here has come from, and NDF members with some of our expertise and skills and partnerships, like with the Bastion Group and Cassini, and bringing our skilled experts like Aaron to be able to come and talk to you, answer some questions and provide some information to help. There are no silly questions. There will be a chance for you to reach out directly to anyone on this call as well. So please feel free, ask away when the time comes up. I believe, Tana, we're starting with a bit of a discussion by James and Dean. Is that correct in my understanding? And I wonder if we should potentially kick off, keeping with our time schedule. Is that about right?
Yes, that's great. Let's go.
Awesome.
Cool. I will enact the screen sharing.
Yeah.
And then pass over to James.
Take it away, guys.
Right, kia ora everyone. So we're going to run through, I guess, a number of slides in the next 20 odd minutes, and we may do that at some pace. There's quite a lot to cover, so feel free to throw your questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of our talk. So we're going to introductions. We don't need to do that. We're going to cover off some stuff around what we call the CIA Triad. We're going to give you an overview of the New Zealand threat landscape and the threat actors that you might face. That'll be tied in with a case study on the British Library cybersecurity incident. A number of you may have heard of that or be familiar with it in passing. We're going to delve into just a tiny bit of detail and see how that ties in with both the stuff that we're going to present before and some of the practical steps that we're going to talk about afterwards. And we'll finalize that with, if you've got everything squared away that we talk about in the practical steps section, what can you do to further strengthen your your organization's security and posture. So one of the underpinning concepts that we talk about in the security industry is the CIA Triad. CIA standing for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If we delve into what each of those particular things mean, confidentiality, generally less important for many of your organizations, but it's essentially keeping the secret things secret and allowing access to public information. So for a lot of organizations in this industry, the information is that you have you're going to want to share it with people. That's the purpose of you having it or curating it, is to be able to provide that information to people. Confidentiality doesn't really apply in those situations, but some of the information that you might contain or look after is confidential and does need to remain confidential. So there might be specific things in archives, for example, that need to continue to remain confidential from the general public. Or you might have information about users or people who use your services and their private information. Obviously, we would need to keep confidential as well. There was I guess a good example of that with the Archives New Zealand situation, where some digitized historical health records were open access by accident. So no malicious intent, but we just need to be clear about what we should be making public and what we shouldn't. Integrity is slightly more difficult to understand. Integrity basically means that we're sure that the information that we're holding is an accurate representation of that information, so it hasn't been tampered with in any way. Examples of that might be financial records that are adjusted in a way that means that people make poor financial decisions. It's not immediately obvious, but they've been manipulated by someone in such a way that the people who are relying on that information make poor decisions. Another example might be a hacktivist who wants to corrupt some information that's around a topic that they disagree with.
What's a hacktivist, James?
A hacktivist is a term that we use for a cyber actor who is attempting to damage or corrupt an organization or their cyber infrastructure because they have philosophical beliefs that are at odds with that organization and what they're doing. An example here might be some of the things that have happened recently around some of the kind of politically charged events, you know, the events in Israel or the Russia-Ukraine war. And if if we as a country or your organizations take a political stance on one side or another, there's always going to be someone who disagrees with that. For example, maybe the Ukraine war. New Zealand's shown its solidarity with Ukraine. If there are sufficiently motivated Russian hacktivists, then they may choose to target organizations that are publicly demonstrating their support for Ukraine. So those are the sorts of considerations that we need to bear in mind there, and protecting the integrity of our information with regards to those sorts of actors. Availability is pretty straightforward. If we hold some digital information and it's not available to the people who need to be able to use it or access it, then availability is impacted. So, for example, if you have a large online archive of records that you make available via the web, for example, and those records are ransomware, then they're no longer available to the people that you're trying to serve them to. The example there, you know, what would happen if a malicious actor were to delete a museum's digital holdings? Well, hopefully we'd be able to recover from that and get them back online. That's not always the case, as we might see with our case study a bit later on. So bearing all of that in mind and using those concepts as a underpinning framework, we thought it's worth talking about some of the types of the types of malware that threat actors are deploying within New Zealand. And we can say confidently that all of these sorts of things are occurring in New Zealand because these are specific malware families, malware being malicious, that we have seen used in New Zealand across the REANNZ network over the last sort of 6 months or so. So picking out specific, there's lots of silly names there. The names are not particularly important, but we can see the types of damage that they're intended to inflict. So things like the first one there imitates a banking Trojan. We've got things that are intended to compromise websites. We've got lots of stuff around information and data theft and information stealing. Cobalt Strike is a particularly sophisticated tool used by a lot of threat actors to deliver additional capabilities into the environment. Remember that Cobalt Strike name, that'll be important later on. But the thing to emphasize here is all of this sophisticated malware we have seen active in New Zealand against New Zealand organizations in recent history. We asked our security operations center specialist at Bastion to kind of do a little bit of research for us in preparation for this talk. And we have access to a number of threat intelligence sources, of data sources and information. One of the interesting things that they discovered was recently, last month, in fact, there was a significant increase in 2 types of techniques used to compromise organizations. The valid account access is the one that's important here. Escape to host is a little bit technical and probably less applicable, but valid accounts basically means threat actors using compromised credentials to access an organization's infrastructure or systems. So they're using someone's genuine username and password to get into a system that you own and start what is going to be a process of inflicting some sort of damage, be that financial or attacking your system's integrity or your system's availability. So that was a particularly interesting finding, I thought, and it tied in really well with the advisory that if you subscribe to the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre advisory, or the CERT-NZ advisories, and if you don't, I would highly encourage you all to do that. About 8 days ago, NCSC put out an advisory saying that there was a large phishing campaign targeting New Zealand organisations, specifically for the purpose of harvesting user credentials, and that ties in exactly with this sort of campaign that we're seeing here. I'm going to give you a really quick overview of the type of threat actors that are targeting New Zealand organisations, and particularly the GLAM sector. We use a number of different sources. The data that we're talking about here has been pulled from an organisation called CrowdStrike. They are a large global cybersecurity firm. And they have a very large reach, and so can provide some really interesting threat intelligence. They use a naming convention to describe the threat actors that they provide threat intelligence on. The interesting bits here are the spiders. Those are cyber criminals motivated by monetary gain. So when you see the names, if it has spider in it, that's their motivations. Nation states or APTs, you might have heard that term, advanced persistent threats, are normally identified by their national animal. So bear for Russia, panda for China. You may have heard cozy bear, for example, is a name that is in the media quite a bit. And hacktivists, generally, the naming convention used for them are jackals. So actors likely to be targeting the GLAM sector in New Zealand, and this is based on threat intelligence from CrowdStrike, as I said, of evidence of these sorts of organisations or these sorts of actors targeting New Zealand organisations within the recent last few months. So this is not hypothetical. This is absolutely based on evidence and factual information. So as you can see there, they're almost all spiders. Got one hacktivist group, the Bounty Jackal, but there are a whole bunch of cyber criminals or cyber organisations that are targeting your sector and your organisations, all for financial motivation. They're all just trying to make money. Bounty Jackal is a pro-Russian hacktivist group, and this is the sort of organisation that would have taken a dim view of any pro-Ukraine support that New Zealand and New Zealand organisations have been showing over the last year or so, while that probably longer now, while that conflict has been going on. As we can see there, they were last seen active in, well, this month actually, in the space. By Spider, they're a particularly active e-crime group, and they use a piece of software called Reseda. It's a ransomware that they use to ransom organizations. So they encrypt an organization's data, and then they ask for a ransom to unencrypt it. They normally do double or triple extortion. So they will steal your data first, and then they'll encrypt it. They'll ask you to pay money to unencrypt it. Then they'll ask you to pay money to not have it dumped on the web somewhere. And then generally they'll look to make money a third way by selling that information to third parties as well.
They've even been known to start looking through that data, and if there's any identifiable information from individuals, they then go after extorting them as well. So we have your health data because we compromised this hospital. They didn't pay us a ransom. Would you like to pay us a ransom? So it's quite insidious.
Yeah, they're pretty nasty people, generally speaking. ransomware as a service is a concept that you may or may not have heard of. So ransomware, as I said, is a type of malware that's designed to lock up your data and make it unavailable to you or your customers. Ransomware as a service is when organizations build and operate the infrastructure to the technical infrastructure to ransom an organization, but they're not actually the ones behind demanding the ransom. So they essentially hire out the capability to be able to do this to other criminal organizations. The interesting thing here is that this is big business. They run help desks. They have 0800 numbers.
Yep.
They will help victims buy Bitcoin. They are really sophisticated businesses that are designed to extort as much money as they can out of you, and they are willing to provide as much support and help as needed.
This isn't you just calling up your local telco and waiting for 3 hours on hold. You know, you may not know how to buy Bitcoin, but their 0800 number will answer the phone immediately and tell you exactly how to do it, because that's, you know, it wouldn't work unless there was, you know.
You get the best customer support you can imagine from these guys. We are
cool.
over here.
The reason that that's relevant, and the reason that we've stepped through this the way we have, is that all of these things were contributing to the recent British Library cyber attack. So we can see a couple of things here that James has spoken about. The intrusion type here was ransomware as a service. The ransomware that was used was Reseda. And you know, and we can make some inferences about the threat actor that was behind this. The other high level data point here is that the ransom demand was 20 Bitcoin, which at the time was about £600,000, which is about 1.2 million New Zealand dollars. What the group actually did was they came in and they copied and exfiltrated, that's, you know, illegally removed, about 600 gigabytes worth of files. Now this included personal data of the library users and staff and all sorts of stuff. When no ransom was paid, all of that data was put up for auction and subsequently dumped on the dark web. So you've got all of your users and staff personal information out there on the dark web, because, you know, the British Library didn't pay the extortion. But in addition to that, you know, that's bad enough, and that is going to be a bad day, and you're talking to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, and, you know, that's going to make the news. But this attack gets even worse, right? So as well as leaking that data out, they also encrypted a whole lot of that data and a whole lot of the systems within the library. So the library didn't have access to all of, you know, a lot of their digital holdings, a lot of their data, maybe even stuff like payroll, right? And so this goes to that availability that James was talking about before, right? That data wasn't available to anyone. They also, you know, they were also very very careful to delete a whole lot of stuff that made it harder to find out who they were. And it was this damaging impact that the report linked at the bottom tells us had the largest effect on the library. While they have secure copies of all of their digital collections, and I know a lot of you there are going, don't worry, we've got backups. That's great. They had backups too. They found that the systems and the infrastructure that they had within the library was so old that they couldn't restore usable servers onto the same infrastructure to restore those backups to. So all of those old mainframe systems, all those older systems, like there isn't the install media anymore to actually get that back. So the British Library is still going through, even today, from October to now, they're starting to feel the impacts of that, and those things still aren't online. It came in via phishing. So we tend to downplay phishing a little bit, but don't. You know, the phishing is how those valid credentials got harvested. From those valid credentials, Cobalt Strike was then used to get an initial hold. That then downloaded that Reseda ransomware and that ransomware did the did all that encrypting and deleting of data. So from very simple starts, something amazingly impactful for the library. So impactful actually that the Financial Times reported that this has cost them between £6 and £7 million, and they only have a budget of £16 million, to do library stuff every year. So this has actually cost them, a sizable portion of that, and ongoing. That's only going to grow. So this has been a major problem for them, and one that is still ongoing today.
So that was pretty scary. Lots of scary stuff in there. What can you do about it? The best place to start is just by making sure that you've got really solid cyber hygiene. And a bunch of you may have already heard of all of these things and be familiar with them. If you are, that's great. Make sure that you're actually doing them rather than just being familiar with them. But they're all covered off in things like CERT and New Zealand's critical controls. So there's lots of great information out there. But just quickly running through these things, making sure that all of your software is up to date and patched is critical. Relying on that legacy software has left the British Library in a pretty poor situation. So identifying and updating legacy software and making sure that you're not getting too far behind the 8 ball is really an important thing to do. Multi-factor authentication. Phishing is not useful, or much less useful if you've got strong multi-factor authentication on everything. Use it everywhere and only choose services that support it. If a service you want to use doesn't support MFA, find a different one. Yeah. Use a password manager. Use different passwords for every service and everything that you sign into. Password managers make that really easy. They can also sometimes store your MFA tokens, so it's all wrapped up in one nice tool. And you should provide that to everyone in your organization. It only takes one person in your organization to be compromised for an actor to get in there and get a toehold. You need tested backups. And when I say tested backups, I mean you need to have tested them. It's great to have backups. If you've never tried restoring from them, you don't have a backup. If you have one copy, that's no copies. If you have 2 copies, that's maybe a copy. If you really need 3 copies, and that 3rd copy needs to be offline. A lot of the ransomware variants these days will literally hunt out the backup store and target that first. So if you have all of your backups online and connected to your network, they will also get ransomed.
All of the backups in the British Library, all of the online backups were also encrypted.
You need an incident response plan. You need to have prepared it, and you need to know what to do and how to enact it. You should have practiced it with a tabletop exercise. That's really critical. The time you don't want to be deciding what it is that you're going to do in the event of a cyber incident is when you've had a cyber incident. And that last bit around security awareness building comes back to the phishing that we talked about earlier. Making people aware of keeping an eye out for something looks a little bit off, it's probably quite off. So being aware of that. Just quickly to finish off, there are some great uplifts that you can do if you've got all that other stuff squared away. Network protection. Cassini works with REANNZ, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that shortly, so I won't go into any detail on that. But a really good, robust, and modern endpoint detection and response product makes a huge difference to the security of your organization. There are lots of providers out there. Bastion's one of them that do like managed EDR services, and they will manage that and respond to all of your incidents and triage them and help you recover from them. Looking at a solid and robust EDR solution is probably one of the single most significant security uplifts you can do after you've got all the basics in place.
Cool. Thank you very much. We'll stop sharing now and hand back to our hosts.
Kia ora, thank
Cheers.
you, Dean and James. That was scary. And also kudos to the British Library for sharing so much information about that attack. I think that's, you know, and it's in a good spirit of libraries and why they're there. But that provided us with so much information that we can use to learn from. Their misfortune. I'm going to hand it to David to introduce Aaron, and I'm just going to mute. There we go. Cool.
Thanks, Sana. I was just wondering, do we want to quickly answer the question that's come through from Dave Sanderson now, or shall we answer that at the end?
It's a pretty big question, I think.
It's a pretty big question. Well, should we hold that question until the end then? Maybe we can spend a little bit more time. You can cover it off. People that can hang around or do want to hear the answer to that, we can cover that then. Aaron, are you still floating around? There you are. So
yes.
We'll pass this across to Aaron. So Aaron is one of the REANNZ technical gurus, specialising in network security. I'm going to let him probably explain his job better than I can, because he's better at it than me. Aaron, do you want to take us away?
Cool. I'll start off by saying we've made a bit of a faux pas here, and I assume that Dean and James were going to talk about the thing that Dean and James just said I was going to talk about. So actually, that's not on my slide set at all.
That's
no
right.
problem.
We can add something in at the end if need be there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
no, that's cool.
We're good. Yeah.
But that's right. I've got other things to talk about as well. So. Come on. Oh no. Sorry, trying to share.
Do you need Dean to help you out with his SharePoint skills?
Oh, there it is. Okay, hopefully that works. Sorry, the meeting room wasn't popping up. It is now. Hopefully. Try that again. We tested this earlier too.
Do you want us to jump in and fill the space a little bit with some of that capability talk while you're doing that, and then you can
go on.
Over to you, James.
All right. So the thing that I skipped over a little bit was the network protection capability that Cassini and REANNZ have put together. Cassini partners with both the National Cybersecurity Centre and CERT New Zealand to access a bunch of New Zealand relevant high trust, high confidence threat intelligence information. We've worked with our partners at REANNZ there to integrate that threat intelligence information into the network layer that REANNZ provides to its members, so that cyber threats associated with bad IP addresses and known malicious network activity is blocked and disrupted before it gets to the membership. So that's a really fantastic service that wouldn't be possible without the fantastic information that's provided by the NCSC and CERT NZ.
Cool. Yeah, and I'll quickly point out as well that the phishing disruption service by CERT NZ is actually required for government entities or government-owned entities. So that is such as REANNZ, universities, Crown Research Institutes, and probably a number of you guys as well. And so when REANNZ implemented this, which we are still working through the last half of it, but when REANNZ implemented this service with Cassini, that basically allowed us to pick it up for the entire sector and meet those obligations that were put down by Cabinet Directive. But anyways, let's move on to my presentation. So I am focusing specifically on the network. I'm a network engineer. The topics that I'm going to go through aren't perhaps quite as scary and sexy as the topics that Dean and James went through. But I am also going to have to go through it quite quickly. So I've kept it very, very high level. So if you have any questions on this, feel free to reach out to Dave Hinton or any of the other engagement managers at REANNZ who can then put you in touch with me. I was going to have my email address here, but then heard this was going on YouTube, so it got taken off. Cool. So the two main topics I'm going to go through is basically how you can secure your own global routing information. So this is resisting route hijacks as well as blocking spoofed packets on your network. And then the other topic I'm going to go through is sort of steps you can take to withstand DDoS attacks. The internet's a pretty big place. It's pretty complicated. No one really has the full understanding of everything on the network. So basically, historically, it's all just been built on trust. Now, the problem with that is it makes it really easy to just ask for people to send someone else's data to you. And this is called route hijacking. Oftentimes, it's actually accidental, just with a typo in configuration, but it can be used maliciously. Now, when your address space is hijacked, two things can happen. The first one is, well, your network is no longer accessible to some or potentially all of the internet. And the other thing that can happen is it can be leveraged to perform man-in-the-middle attacks, which has been done in the past to man-in-the-middle banking services and things like that. So it's kind of a bad thing for someone to just say, send all someone else's data to me. And the way this works really is anyone can just advertise it anywhere historically and just say, hey, I'm this organization. And then people will just start sending it there. This could be the entire internet, and so you could be down completely, or this could just be parts of the internet, generally what's closer to the person who's doing the advertising. And that will cause a partial outage for you guys. Now, the classic example of this was in 2008, when a country decided they wanted to censor YouTube, and they did that by hijacking YouTube's routing. Now, the problem with that was they didn't. They then proceeded to advertise those hijacked routes out to the entire internet and started drawing all YouTube traffic towards themselves. So not only did they take YouTube down globally, but they actually DOSed their entire country, because not too many countries can actually handle the amount of traffic that goes to YouTube. The other thing is it's really easy on the internet to actually just send data with a source address that's not actually your source address. Now, this behavior is not terribly useful in general. You can't stand up connections, you can't do two-way communication by doing this, but what it can do is be leveraged to perform amplification DDoS attacks. It does this by essentially sending a packet out to a service and saying you're from someone else, that packet or that data came from someone else. And then if you pick the right kind of service, a much larger response can come back, and that gets sent to the person who was being spoofed, the organization that was being spoofed. So a very small amount of data can be multiplied hundreds or thousands of times, depending on the type of service that query was sent to. That response goes back to the real organization, and this is used to create DDoS attacks. As you can see there, that's a graph of an actual DDoS attack that occurred to one of REANNZ's members, a university. And there's not too many organizations in New Zealand that can handle a 100 gigabit DDoS attack. So these are the two main issues around sort of routing and the lack of trust of routing. And so what can we do to actually, shore up our routing information, our security on the global internet? And the first thing is MANRS. I'm not going to go too much into what MANRS is, because I don't have time, and this was an entire half-hour presentation that I did somewhere else. But basically, MANRS is sort of a global initiative. It's this collaborative group of people, of organizations that basically presents a framework for steps that you can take to shore up, or can take to shore up our routing data. Now, in their infinite wisdom, MANRS is not actually pointed at end organizations, end users. It is geared towards steps that telcos can take. So actually, in terms of MANRS itself, there is nothing you need to do or nothing you can do really to make those steps to secure yourself using MANRS as a framework. But what you can do is you can actually challenge your ISP to achieve MANRS compliance, to ensure that they're taking all the steps to ensure that hygienic data is being sent into the global internet. If you're going through a procurement, I would highly recommend adding weighting to MANRS compliance because it is just that important, and it's only when we're putting money on the line or money is on the line that telcos actually really get motivated to take these steps, because it is a little bit of work, not too much, but a little bit. The other thing that you can do, or the other thing that we can do, is enable RPKI. Basically, RPKI is a way of adding an amount of crypto into global routing. And so it creates some trust on the global internet. So again, this is typically done by telcos, but there are steps that you can do if you own your own address space, where you can sign your own ROAs, your route origin authorizations, and this will increase the resistance of that address space to route hijacking. It's not perfect, but it does put you in a much, much better position. If you don't own your own address space, have a chat with your ISP, have a chat with your telco, and ask them if that's what they're doing. And challenge them to do that with their own address space, because even if you're not in control of that address space, if it gets hijacked, you get impacted by that. So there's a blog post there of how you can log into your APNet portal if you own your own address space to actually enable those ROAs, the ROAs. And now I will say, be very careful with this, because you are explicitly signing in crypto how you are going to advertise your routing information to the internet. And if you configure it differently to how you're actually doing it, you can drop yourself off from large portions of the internet. So much care needs to be taken. Again, if you want to talk a little bit more about this, I'm absolutely happy to have that discussion or have that chat. So the other thing I want to talk about a little bit is DDoS attacks. DDoS attacks come in a number of forms. The most obvious one is the volumetric attack. This typically is using, as I mentioned before, spoofed source addresses, probably from botnets, to actually send large amounts of data at a specific location or network. And like I said, we've seen 100 gigabit versions of this on the REANNZ network, and there's been much, much larger DDoSes globally. The other thing that they might target is your perimeter firewall. The reason for that is they're actually pretty flaky things. Everything has to go through them, and they're kind of a do-it-all Swiss Army knife box. And so that makes it actually really easy to make them fall over. So usually a resource exhaustion attack, so not so much bandwidth being sent, but a lot of session initiation type packets or data. And this basically causes the firewalls, either CPU or memory or state tables, to fill up and then stop being able to accept more connections. In essence, that takes everything down that's behind it. And the other thing you can do, and this is a much, much harder problem to solve for me as an ISP, are attacks that target digital services. These generally are at the application layer, and they take steps to actually either cause it basically caused the service to stop being able to respond to legitimate queries, either by probably sending too many of them generally, but sometimes they can target issues in the particular service itself. Now, for best results, an attacker will use all of the above, constantly changing the types of attacks, constantly changing the targets, and that makes it very, very difficult to actually protect against. Fortunately, we haven't seen in New Zealand, although this is definitely increasing globally, we haven't seen too many of these in REANNZ themselves, ourselves, although we have seen a little bit. But this is the type of attack, or this is the approach that was taken to take down the New Zealand Stock Exchange several years ago when it was offline for, I don't know, I think it was about a fortnight while they scrambled to figure out what to do. So what can you do to harden yourself against DDoS attacks? The very first thing to do is identify likely targets. These are going to be either very visible services, so your company website, or services that are relatively easy to attack, but actually have a very big impact on an organization, such as your authoritative DNS servers. The other things, is they might attack your reason for being, your core purpose as a business. So the easiest thing you can do is segment your infrastructure. So leverage cloud services for, public-facing services. And this has the added benefit of actually allowing them to scale up to withstand DDoS attacks as well. But also it moves them off of your infrastructure. And so if they do get targeted, your infrastructure or your locally hosted infrastructure continues to function. Keep your people and your digital infrastructure separate. If your digital services are targeted, then you want your people online to be able to start looking into ways to mitigate that. And the other thing is, instead of having one big monolithic firewall that everything goes through, split your network up into multiple smaller networks. That way, if one ends up getting targeted, the rest of them hopefully continue to function. External DDoS mitigation is a must. I don't like, telcos will generally offer DDoS mitigation services at an extra charge. At REANNZ, we don't actually do that. We feel that's kind of blackmaily and a bit problematic, and so we offer it as standard to our all of our customer base. And the most important thing is have a plan. Namely, who do you call if things are going wrong? What's your your ISP or your DDoS mitigation provider's contact details? That's easy to get your hands on. They'll usually have much better visibility of what's going on, and they'll be able to take extra steps to actually help mitigate these attacks. Cheers. That's it for me. Thank you.
Awesome, Aaron. Thank you for that. Now, I believe that there's a question that come through earlier, and maybe a couple of other questions, but I just want to take a moment. I've seen a few people dropped off because we've just run a little bit over time. We will be distributing out this video so that people can watch it in their own time. From that, if they do have questions about specific things that have been brought up or anything that's been raised, you can let myself or Tana know, and we can get one of the guys to get in touch with you just to cover things off, not as a sort of anything overly in depth, or it can be as in depth as you want, basically. Tana, is there anything you'd like to add before we maybe ask James and Dean to answer that question?
Oh, just thanks a lot, guys, for the session today, and there was a lot of really cool names in there that I'm going to look to see if I can drop into my everyday conversation for the remainder of the week. That's my little game that I'm going to be playing with myself. Yeah, and thank you, Aaron, as well. That was there was a lot in there, so I'm probably going to have to rewatch this session a couple of times and get my little ChatGPT guy next to me to explain some of what you said. But thank you very much. We do have a question from Dave. So if you're welcome to pop off, you will be sent the video if you need to, you know, jump into your next meeting. But the question from Dave is, how do you propose managing sync of offline backups and ensuring when you do sync them, you're not copying over tools to compromise that backup? Over to one of the experts in the room.
Yeah. That's a big question and a pretty tough one, to be fair. I think the process that you're going to use to manage the synchronization of it is largely dependent on the tooling and the products that you're using for backups. There's lots of different options. There is always a window of opportunity while you're synchronizing your backups to your offline backup where they are temporarily online, and there's really very little way around that. At some point you have to take a backup, and so that exists, that opportunity is going to exist. There are solutions for doing that in a kind of staged way that minimize that online time, but it does really probably depend on the tools that you're using.
Yeah. And quite often as well, we've seen in an incident response fashion that, and I think that this is part of what the second part of Dave's question is going to, is that, you know, the ransomware actually made it into the environment and you backed it up with all of the rest of your data, so that it's just waiting there for when you thaw it back out again. And part of the incident response team goes back through those backups to try and find out when the malware got into your environment, and do you have backups from before then? So it's not just the case of maybe having.
I was listening to it.
It's actually important to have a number of backups over time, so that you can go back to a known clean state, and depending on how your detection mechanisms are going, that known clean state could be quite a while ago.
Yeah, there's tooling obviously that will detect you to those sorts of that sort of software appearing on your network. Obviously things like the EDR that I mentioned earlier, depending on what sort of EDR capability you're looking at, they're pretty sophisticated these days. They can pick up pretty much every variety of known malware, particularly ransomware, but then the ability for threat actors to mutate and change that malware is becoming more and more sophisticated as well. So as Dean said, it's often not about preventing it from occurring in the first place. That's almost going to be almost impossible. There's lots of preventative measures you can put in place to minimize that threat, but there's always the chance there that you might back up the tooling. It's having sufficient depth of backups that you can recover to a point where you hadn't backed it up. There may be some data loss, I guess, involved in that situation if you have to go back too far. The other thing too is having visibility, so that you can track forensically when that backup, that malware may have gotten to your environment. And so that's where, you know, things like having the additional log aggregation tooling and things like that allow a forensic incident response team to identify which backup it might be in. That's pretty critical. Otherwise, you're into the situation where you're sort of restoring from backup and checking whether or not the malware is present, and then iteratively going backwards through it, which is not a fun position to be in. Sorry, it is quite a probably a bit of a high level answer to a very complex problem, but it does largely depend on technology and tooling as well.
I guess, sorry to jump in, Dean.
Just fire them through.
Just on that note, is there anywhere you guys can recommend, I guess this goes for you, Aaron, as well, where organizations can seek out some of this information, sort of free to air information? Where can they get some pointers, some tips and tricks? that I
Yeah,
feel would be quite valuable.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're always happy to help, but CERT New Zealand and the National Cybersecurity Centre need to get big shout outs in this space as well.
Yeah.
CERT NZ does a really good job of helping, organisations of any size and individuals as well within New Zealand, and they've just got a plethora of resources on their website. Goes all the way from individuals explaining to your parents about how to do password hygiene, right up to medium organisations, and then you got the National Cybersecurity Centre who kind of takes over at that top end for organisations of national significance, and they do a really good job there of both advisories coming out, but also resources around around awareness and securing as well.
But yeah, both those organizations, I'd encourage everyone to go and have a look at their websites. They both have a number of white papers and resources like the CERT NZ critical controls. The NCSC has similar sorts of white paper and information available on it around a lot of these kind of topics. So yeah, absolutely fantastic resources there.
Yep.
Oh, thank you, guys. I think we've gone over a little bit in terms of time, but as I've said a few times, more than happy to put you in touch with anyone. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Tana, Aaron, James, Dean. Anyone would be more than happy to assist.
Cool. Happy to help people out. It's an important topic, and you shouldn't feel like you're going through it alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Oh, well, thank you. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to David, Aaron, James, and Dean for sharing their knowledge with us. I think it's all been said before. Reach out if you want to find out more. We've put the links to CERT and to the NCSC in the chat there, and we will also put them in the email that goes out to you with more information, so and comments on the video. So thank you very much. We have more online sessions coming up. The next one will be with Val and Marty from the National Library around digital preservation, and we've got more that we are preparing as well. If you have any suggestions for anything that you would like NDF to talk about in these online sessions, please feel free to reach out and let us know. admin@ndf.org.nz is the email to get us on there. We would love these to be as useful as they possibly can be for you. Thanks again, everybody, and kia ora.
Cool. Ka kite anō.